Imagine waking up to find trillions of dollars had simply vanished overnight. That's exactly what happened across China and Hong Kong when a sudden wave of US tariffs sent financial markets into free fall. Investors stared at red screens in disbelief. Stock indexes weren't just dipping, they were plummeting. The Hang Seng lost over 3% in a single day. Shanghai's composite index, nearly 5% wiped out. It wasn't just numbers, it was retirement savings. It was startup capital. It was the silent panic of millions, watching their futures shrink with every tick downward. Some called it the worst single-day market bloodbath since the 2008 financial crisis. And for many in Asia, it felt even more personal this time, because it wasn't triggered by Wall Street greed, but by political will. Now let's rewind. How did a set of tariffs, just taxes on imports, spark such devastation? To understand that, we need to look beyond the headlines, into the ripple effects that turned a policy move into a full-blown market earthquake. Let's step into the moment the shockwave began and trace how it spread from Washington to the heart of Asia's economy. Did you ever notice how some fights don't start with a bang, but with a whisper that slowly turns into a roar? That's exactly how the US-China trade war escalated. It didn't happen overnight. It built up, layer by layer, tariff by tariff. At first, it seemed like a warning shot, just 10% tariffs on a select group of Chinese imports. Consumer electronics, washing machines, solar panels, things that felt distant for most Americans. It was enough to rattle the markets, but not enough to cause panic. But then came round two, a sharp jump to 34% tariffs. This time, the net widened. Steel, aluminum, machinery, even everyday goods started to feel the heat. Manufacturers in the US began sounding the alarm, and prices on shelves quietly began to creep up. By the time the 50% tariff proposal surfaced, it was clear. This wasn't just a trade disagreement, it was a message. I remember reading the headlines that week, and I thought, this isn't about trade anymore. It's about power, about who sets the rules in a changing world, and who gets to keep the crown in a globalized economy. Each wave of tariffs wasn't just hitting goods, it was striking symbols of national strength. China's tech, America's agriculture, industrial pride on both sides. What's often missed in the numbers is that this tariff war wasn't just about dollars and cents. It was about identity, about two countries saying, we won't back down. And when ego steps into the game, logic often steps out. So what happens when the other side punches back? Let's take a closer look at China's strategic response and the hidden pain points that hit closer to home than most Americans expected. You know what they say, every action has an equal and opposite reaction. And China, it didn't stay silent for long. When the US fired its tariff shots, China struck back, fast and calculated. Beijing didn't just respond randomly, it went after key American industries where the pain would be deeply felt. Farms, factories, and future tech. Let's start with American farmers, especially those in the Midwest. China slapped tariffs on soybeans, corn, pork, staples of US agriculture. And this wasn't just about numbers, it was personal. I remember hearing stories of farmers in Iowa and Illinois, people who'd spent decades building up their land and legacy, suddenly watching export contracts vanish overnight. One farmer said, "It felt like we got caught in the middle of a fight we didn't start, but we're paying the price." And it wasn't just soybeans. Harley-Davidson, an iconic American brand, also took a hit. With Chinese tariffs making their bikes more expensive overseas, Harley actually moved some production abroad to avoid the backlash. Imagine that. A symbol of American freedom, forced to adapt because of a political chess match. Then came tech. China targeted parts and components critical to American electronics. Things that power everything from iPhones to medical devices. It was a clear signal. We know where it hurts, and we're not afraid to press there. What struck me the most? These weren't just economic targets. They were political pressure points. Why? Because farmers and factory workers are powerful voices in swing states, the very states that decide U.S. elections. So in a way, China wasn't just responding to tariffs. It was playing the long game, nudging voters, influencing pressure, and subtly shaping American politics from thousands of miles away. And that raises a deeper question. Was this just about money and markets, or was something even bigger at stake? To answer that, we need to look at the hidden weapon most people never talk about, one buried deep beneath the surface, yet vital to every modern war, phone, and car. Let's talk about rare earths and how China may have been holding the most powerful card all along. You've probably never held one in your hand, but without it, your phone wouldn't work, your electric car wouldn't move, and your country's defense systems completely compromised. I'm talking about rare earth elements, and China? It controls over 80% of the world's supply. During the peak of the trade war, Beijing sent a chilling message, hinting at the idea of cutting off rare earth exports to the US. It wasn't just a threat, it was a reminder. We own the materials your future depends on. Let's break this down. Rare earths are the backbone of our modern world, used in everything from smartphones and electric vehicle batteries to wind turbines and even missile guidance systems. Imagine this, the GPS on your phone relies on a rare earth magnet the size of a fingernail. The fighter jets that secure national airspace, they depend on precision systems built with these same elements. It's wild to think something so tiny can hold such immense power. And yet, for decades, the US let its rare earth production shrink, shut down mines, lost refining capacity, and relied more and more on imports from, you guessed it, China. When the trade war heated up, Washington woke up. Suddenly, there was a scramble to diversify, fast. They turned to Australia, invested in recycling programs, and even looked into reopening old US mines like Mountain Pass in California. But here's the thing. Building that infrastructure takes years, not months. And from where I stand, this part of the trade war didn't just expose an economic weakness. It exposed a strategic vulnerability. It made me realize how interconnected our global economy really is, and how dangerous it is to depend on a single supplier for something so critical. So now we're left with a haunting question. If China holds the minerals, who really holds the power? And while rare earths shook up national security circles, another battlefield was quietly erupting, one that directly affects your everyday life and may have changed global prices permanently. Let's talk about the real cost of this trade war and how you and I ended up paying the price. It sounds simple, right? If you're buying more than you're selling, you're losing. That was President Trump's core argument when he launched the trade war. The US trade deficit with China was ballooning, over $375 billion in 2017 alone. So to him, tariffs weren't just a tactic, they were a solution. But here's where things get tricky. The trade deficit, it's not just a scoreboard of wins and losses, it's a reflection of deeper structural forces. Let me explain. Americans love to consume. We import everything from cheap electronics to fast fashion because our economy is built on spending. Meanwhile, countries like China produce at scale with lower costs and an export-driven mindset. Plus, this one often gets missed, the US dollar is the world's reserve currency. That means there's constant demand for dollars globally, which actually keeps the dollar strong, but also makes US exports more expensive and imports cheaper. So even with tariffs in place, these core dynamics didn't suddenly vanish. In fact, if we zoom out and look at history, Reagan had deficits, Bush had deficits, Obama did too. Each approached trade with different philosophies, but the deficit persisted. And I get it. A giant trade gap feels unfair, especially when American factories shut down and foreign goods flood the shelves at Walmart. But from my perspective, trying to fix a structural issue with short-term tariffs is like using duct tape to seal a sinking ship. It might slow the leak, but it doesn't fix the hole. And while the numbers look bold on the campaign trail, they didn't always translate into better outcomes for everyday people. So maybe the real question isn't, is the trade deficit bad? Maybe it's, are we solving the right problem? Now let's zoom out even further, because beyond the economics and politics, this trade war marked a turning point. It wasn't just about money, it was about world order, technology dominance, and global power. In our next chapter, we'll explore how this economic battle transformed into a new Cold War of influence. You know what they say about storms. Even if you're not in the eye of it, you still feel the wind. That's exactly what happened with the US-China trade war. It wasn't just Washington and Beijing playing economic chess. The ripple effects hit the entire global economy. Let's start with some unexpected winners. When American companies started looking for alternatives to Chinese factories, Vietnam became a rising star. Big brands like Samsung, Nike, and even Apple suppliers began shifting production there. Exports boomed. Industrial parks filled up. Vietnam's GDP got a nice boost. And it wasn't just Vietnam. Mexico also stepped in to supply auto parts. The European Union saw some opportunities too, especially in tech and machinery. But here's the twist. What looked like a golden opportunity also came with hidden risks. Vietnam, for instance, started facing overdependence on US demand. Its economy became entangled in the very tension it was benefiting from. Plus, under pressure, the US began accusing Vietnam of currency manipulation. Talk about being caught in the middle. And zooming out, the IMF and WTO both issued warnings. They forecasted that the trade war could shave off nearly $700 billion from global GDP. That's not just numbers. That's factories slowing down in Germany, port cities in Africa handling fewer goods, and families around the world feeling uncertainty. To me, this is where the story becomes more than economics. It becomes human. Trade isn't just numbers on a spreadsheet. It's jobs, futures, stability. And when two giants fight, the rest of the world often pays the price. But this ripple effect also reveals something bigger. We're in a world where economies are more interconnected than ever. And when trust breaks down between two superpowers, everyone feels it. So, what have we really learned from all this? In the final chapter, we'll step back and ask, was the trade war worth it? And what legacy did it leave behind? Let's bring it all together. How does this story end? That's the strange part. It doesn't. Unlike wars with a peace treaty or games with a final score, the US-China trade war left the world in a cloud of uncertainty. There was no dramatic handshake, no conclusive winner. Instead, we're now living in what feels like a cold economic war. Both sides are doubling down. China is pushing for self-reliance in semiconductors, AI, and defense. The US is investing billions in reshoring chip factories through the CHIPS Act. And what we're seeing is the slow but very real decoupling of two of the world's biggest economies. Think about that. For decades, the world grew under the assumption that globalization would bind us together. But now, we're watching the birth of two parallel tech ecosystems, two supply chains, two internets, even two visions for what the future looks like. One possibility? A more fragmented world where countries are pressured to choose sides. Not just politically, but technologically and economically too. Another? A negotiated truce where the US and China find ways to compete responsibly and the rest of the world builds resilience by diversifying partnerships. Personally, I don't think this is about who wins. It's about whether the world can adapt fast enough without breaking apart. Because here's what history shows us. It's not just trade policies that shape the future. It's how people, businesses, and governments respond, with fear or with vision. And maybe that's the real takeaway. This trade war wasn't just a conflict between two countries. It was a stress test for the global system we all rely on. So now the question becomes, in a world where old rules are fading, what kind of future do we want to build? So let's pause for a second and reflect. This wasn't just a story about tariffs, deficits, or soybeans. It was a window into something much bigger. We saw how a few percentage points in tariffs sparked a global chain reaction, How farmers in Iowa and factories in China were caught in a battle of ideology, how rare earths and microchips became the new front lines of modern power, and how even in Vietnam or Mexico, the ripple effects were impossible to ignore. But maybe the most important thing is this: there is no simple ending. We are living in an era of uncertainty and adaptation. So here's my invitation to you. If you're a policymaker, an entrepreneur, or just a curious mind, use what you've learned here to look beyond the headlines. Ask the deeper questions. Who benefits? Who bears the cost? And how do we build systems that don't just react, but resiliently evolve? If this video gave you a new perspective, hit the like button. It really helps us reach more curious minds. Subscribe for more breakdowns like this, clear, honest, and thoughtful, and drop a comment below. Where do you think this global trade story is headed next? We'd love to hear your voice. Thanks for watching. Until next time, stay curious, stay informed, and stay kind.